Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Friday Q&A, a webinar series produced by the UF Thomson Earth System Institute's Scientists in Every Florida School program and the Manatee Scars initiative. Each Friday at 3 p.m. for 30 minutes, a scientist will present on their area of expertise, followed by a question and answer session. Scientists in Every Florida School is a free program housed within the Thomson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The CEFS program connects and builds long-term partnerships between teachers and scientists in order to bring current scientific research and big data into classrooms in Florida and beyond. The Manatee Scholars Initiative is based at Valencia College in Orlando, Florida. Our goal is to connect, create, and elevate educational experiences in the classroom and our community. Supported by the Lake Nona community, we facilitate programs in both Orange and Osceola County schools and work with community leaders and businesses to build out-of-school learning programs. During the COVID-19 school closures, we've been happy to partner with CEFS to continue engaging with our students, teachers, and parents on a digital platform. And today we are joined by Manatee Master Rachel Shanker from the Manatee Lagoon in Palm Beach County, Florida. Born and raised in South Florida, Rachel attended art school for both middle and high school, where she studied and developed a love for visual arts. Her true passion has always been in natural sciences, particularly marine biology. In addition to her work at Manatee Lagoon, Rachel is also currently a graduate student at Florida Atlantic University studying marine ecology. Her ability to inform others, especially about nature and conservation, has grown and developed throughout her career as a student. She enjoys presenting research, exchanging knowledge, and plans to continue doing so throughout her postgraduate career. So today, as Rachel tells you about her work, please add your questions into the chat and one of our moderators will ask your question for you. Without further ado, I will pass it off to you, Rachel. Thank
you. Thank you so much for having me today. As they mentioned, I am a Manatee Master at Manatee Lagoon, which is an FPL Eco Discovery Center located in Riviera Beach, Florida. So I'll talk a little bit more about what Manatee Lagoon is towards the end of the presentation, but today's presentation focuses all about manatees. So I have two parts to this presentation. The first one answers the question, what is a manatee? And then the second part has a little bit more in-depth facts about those manatees. So the first question I would like to answer is, what is a manatee? So manatees are very large aquatic mammals. So they can grow on average about 10 feet long as adults and weigh about 1,000 pounds. So when we say large, we do mean very large. They are Florida's largest marine, South Florida's largest marine mammal. They are also aquatic. So that means that they live their whole life in the water. Manatees, Florida manatees, can be found in saltwater as well as freshwater. So they are one of the few that travels back and forth from saline to freshwater sources. And they are a mammal. So of course that means they share many of the same characteristics we do, such as the need to breathe air. They have hair on their bodies, so it is very short and wiry and thick. The hairs on a manatee are known as vibrissae, and they act somewhat like whiskers of a cat or dog to help them feel their surroundings. In addition to breathing air and having hair, they also have live birth, and the mother feeds milk to their newborn calves or baby manatees. So they are gray in color with a long rounded body and a rounded flattened tail. So they have a very distinctive shape. I've heard them called sea potatoes before, and I'll go back to this picture here because they do have that very elongate round shape to their body. And their tail, as you can see on the right in this photograph, is very flattened, but still very round. So that is, and I'll talk more in a few slides about this, so that's one of the ways to distinguish them versus some of their closest relatives, is that round paddle-like tail. They're also herbivores. So that means that they eat vegetation or plant matter. And this is why they're also commonly known as sea cows. So it's a very, very common term for a manatee. They're sometimes called sea cows. And you can see on the right here, this manatee is feeding on grass that clearly is above the water. So their favorite, most common food source is going to be seagrasses, but it is not uncommon for manatees to eat any vegetation they come across. So at Manatee Lagoon, towards the south end of our property, we have a beachy area where at high tide, the leaves of some of the trees nearby kind of overhang that water. And we do see manatees reach their heads out of the water to nibble the leaves right off of those trees. So in this photo here, you can see a manatee reaching its head out of the water to mow someone's lawn for them, probably along a canal. So they are herbivores and they eat a lot of plant matter. So who are a manatee's closest relatives? So this is an image of our Florida manatee, and our Florida manatee is a subspecies of the West Indian manatee. So the West Indian manatee is the species, and then underneath that, there's two separate distinct categories or subspecies of manatees. So one of those is the Antillean manatee that's found throughout the Caribbean and some parts of northern South America. And then the Florida manatee is our manatee we have here in Florida, hence the name, that is found almost exclusively in Florida and the more southern portions of the US. So some of them will travel during summer months out of the state of Florida, up further north into the Carolinas and a little bit further west out of the Panhandle. But the majority of Florida's manatees, or the Florida manatee, will stick around the state along the coastline throughout the year. So they belong to the order Sirenia, along with a couple of other species. So the Amazonian manatee is another species of manatee found in the Amazon. It is the only exclusively freshwater species of manatee. Then we have the West African manatee, found, just as the name suggests, in West Africa. And there's also the dugong, which looks a little bit different from a manatee, but they are in that same order. And so the name Sirenia, if you've ever heard another term for a mermaid, is a siren. And so they got that name because long ago, sailors saw these manatees and these dugongs, and they thought they were mermaids. They came upon them and thought, this isn't exactly what was described to me when I thought of a beautiful mermaid, but this must be what they were talking about. So they mistook some of these animals for mermaids, and that's how they got that name of the order, Sirenia. So a little bit of a fun story for that. And these are some images of those other species. So up on the top, you can see the dugong. And then on the left, you can see that Amazonian manatee. And on the right is the West African manatee. So those three species are still alive today. Those are other species of manatee or Sirenia. And the main way you can tell them apart, if you look at the tails of all of these species, you can see the manatees have that very round, flattened paddle-like tail, whereas the dugong and the Steller sea cow underneath it have more of a fluke, similar to that of a dolphin. So that's one of the main distinguishing characteristics between the two. So that Steller sea cow was also in that same order, that same group of animals. However, that one is extinct. So they were found in very cold regions of, I believe, the Bering Sea, and they were hunted to extinction for their blubber. So they were much, much larger than any manatee or dugong we have alive today. They grew up to about 30 feet, and they had a lot of thick insulating blubber, which is not something that our Florida manatees have. So our Florida manatees have very little blubber, which means it's hard for them to keep themselves warm, which is why we have manatee season where they come further south, and why Manatee Lagoon is such an important place, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. So as for some of their other closest living relatives that are outside of that order, the elephant and the hyrax are most closely related to the manatee. So there are some characteristics that these animals share that help us know that they are closely related other than just genetics. So here are some images of some of those characteristics. So all the way on the left, you can see the lower jaw of a manatee, a Florida manatee. And if you look at the teeth, you can see they only have molars. So they have no front teeth, no canines, no incisors, because they don't have the need to bite or tear. They're only eating vegetation. They only need to chew. And if you look closely at that image, you'll see the back of the jaw. Those teeth are a little bit cleaner, a little less decayed than those in the front. So that's because manatees have a really neat adaptation called marching molars that they share with elephants, where the molars in the back of the jaw will push forward. The ones towards the front of the manatee's mouth will fall out and be replaced by those right behind them. So it's almost like a conveyor belt of teeth so that they don't have to worry about their teeth wearing down or decaying as they're eating all of that vegetation. So manatees eat about 10% of their body weight every day. So you can imagine that's a lot of chewing, and it wears down their teeth quickly. So this adaptation allows them to not have to worry about losing teeth throughout their life, and they share that with elephants. In the middle is that same photo of the manatee munching on seagrass. So just like elephants, manatees are herbivores, and just like manatees, elephants are herbivores. But this photo really shows you that prehensile lip that manatees have. So elephants have that prehensile trunk that they can use to grab food and pull it up to their mouths. Manatees have this split lip. You can see here, he's using that lip to grab the seagrass or land grass in this case, and pull it to their mouths. So they can use those split lips, that prehensile lip, to grab food and help pull it out of the substrate. And then in the photo on the right, you can see that manatees, along with elephants, have fingernails. So they'll have 3 to 4 fingernails on each flipper. And that's another characteristic that they share with their closest living relatives. So a few more manatee facts. As I mentioned before, manatees weigh about 1,000 pounds, 1,000 to 1,200 pounds on average. They can be over 3,000 pounds, so they can get much larger, but most of the ones that you will see are going to be around 1,000 to 1,200 pounds and about 10 feet long, but they can grow to about 13 feet long. So they are very large animals. And we have this graphic down here to show you just how large an adult manatee would be standing next to an adult human, as well as a baby manatee, which is usually about 4 feet long when they're newborns and weigh over 60 pounds when they're newborns just out of the mother. So these are very large mammals. And as we mentioned, they eat vegetation. So they are herbivores, or that scientific term for vegetarians. They eat seagrasses. That's going to be their main food source, but they do eat other vegetation as well. And if they're in the springs and those freshwater systems in Florida, they may be eating other types of vegetation and other plants that grow in the springs. So those seagrasses grow in our salt water and in our brackish water in the intracoastal. So when they swim up through the spring systems, they do eat other vegetation there. So they eat about 10% of their weight daily. So for the average manatee that weighs about 1,000 pounds, that's going to be about 100 pounds of vegetation that these animals are eating every single day. So that lends itself to the wearing out of their teeth. And that seagrass is growing on the bottom of the water column in the sand. So as they're chewing it, they will accidentally end up chewing some sand. And if you've ever been to the beach and had some snacks or ate a sandwich and got some sand in your mouth, it's very gritty. And you can imagine if you're chewing on seagrass all day long, 100 pounds of it, it's going to wear down those teeth quickly. So that lends itself to that really cool adaptation of marching molars. So in captivity, manatees can live to be over 65 years old. But in the wild, there's a lot more threats than there would be in an aquarium where you're taken care of by the aquarists. So they don't usually live as long. In the wild, they live between, on average, 20 to 30 years. There are manatees that are over 60 years old that have been tracked for many years in the wild, but on average, they're about 20 to 30, or they live 20 to 30 years in the wild due to threats such as cold stress, red tide, and boats. Boats are the leading human-related threat to manatees. And we'll talk more about their scars soon, but over 80% of adult manatees are going to have some form of boat scar by the time they reach adulthood. So there's many threats out there in the wild for them, including boating and pollution. So because of all that, their listing status is threatened. So they were downlisted, I believe, about 2 years ago now, from endangered to threatened. So what that means is that they are still protected. You still cannot ride a manatee, never ever. You cannot harass them, you cannot chase them. You only want to observe from a safe distance. But that means that their numbers are going up. So they were threatened, or they were in danger of becoming extinct even more so a couple years ago than they are now. So their population has been increasing, which is why they were downlisted from endangered to threatened. So they still are completely protected. They haven't lost any of their protections, and it's still really important that we watch out for them and do what we can to take care of them. But it's a little bit of a silver lining, knowing that their population is increasing. So as I mentioned before, most adult manatees have scars. It's a very high percentage. By the time they reach adulthood, they will have some form of scar. And so as sad as that is, it does allow scientists to use those scar patterns to tell manatees apart and track them. So researchers will tag and track manatees, but it is a bit of a process to get the tracking devices on them, and those can get very pricey. So one of the easier and less invasive ways to track a manatee is based on its scars. So you can see this manatee here, those white markings on its back, those are scars from boats, passing boats. And each manatee is going to have a completely different scar pattern on its back or its side or somewhere on its body, on its tail. You can see this one, his tail is looking a little jagged. So that's one way you can track manatees. If you see a manatee at Manatee Lagoon with this scar pattern, and then a couple weeks later, you see the same scar pattern, let's say on the west coast of Florida, you know that that manatee traveled a great distance and you know a little bit about more about where it is going. So how do manatees spend their time? They spend a lot of their time eating and sleeping and traveling. That's pretty much the life of a manatee. So there's a really great shot from Manatee Lagoon of that manatee swimming along our seawall. And you can see he has lots of barnacles on its back. So that's one way to tell this manatee spends most of its time in the salt water, because if it swims back and forth from salt to fresh, chances are those barnacles will not survive. They can't live in the fresh water, so they'll fall off. So this manatee likely spent a lot of his time in the salt water of the intracoastal. Manatees spend about 8 hours a day grazing on seagrasses and other plants. So they spend a vast majority of their day feeding because they have to eat a lot of that vegetation to get the nutrients they need. They also rest anywhere from 2 to 12 hours a day, and they do this either suspended at the water's surface, floating and breathing as they need to. When they're resting, they can hold their breath for about 20 minutes. When they're active, it's usually 2 to 3 minutes they hold their breath. So what they'll do when they're resting is float up near the surface and breathe as needed, or they'll lie down at the bottom of the water column and then come up to take a breath as they need to. So manatees have no natural predators. They do come in contact with sharks when they're in the intracoastal or the ocean, and they do come in contact with alligators when they're in the springs. We have seen at Manatee Lagoon multiple sharks swimming in our outflow at the same time as manatees, but because manatees are so big, remember the average manatee is about 10 feet long, they don't have any natural predators. Nothing really wants to actively hunt them and try and feed on them. They're just too large and too much of a threat. So manatees are commonly found in shallow waters. I mentioned before that they sometimes sleep on the bottom. When I say that, they're only in 3 to 6 feet of water. They're very rarely found in deep, deep water because they're going to be feeding near seagrass beds most of the time. And seagrass, just like any other plant, needs sunlight in order to grow. So manatees are present year-round in Florida, but manatee season is November 15th through March 31st. Excuse me. So our Florida manatee, as I mentioned, is found throughout the state all year round. Some of them will travel further north and out of Florida, but most of them stick around all year. But when November 15th rolls around, when it starts getting a little cooler, down here in South Florida, it's usually a little later in the winter, they'll start to travel to warm water sites such as Manatee Lagoon. So as temperatures go down, manatees head to warm water sites in order to stay healthy. So they will travel down to South Florida, and this is a little image of our mascot coming to visit us in the Lake Worth Lagoon at Manatee Lagoon, which is right there in Riviera Beach. So manatees come to these warm water sites because they cannot survive temperatures that are below 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So when the water temperature drops to 68 degrees or below, they have to come to these warm water sites, such as Manatee Lagoon, where the power plant right next door to us puts out warm water in order to cool their machinery. They use the water from the surrounding Lake Worth Lagoon. And when it comes out, it's about 10 degrees warmer than when it came in. So that's an essential warm water site in the winter for these manatees. So if you would like to learn more about manatees, we are closed right now, but when we reopen, we'd love for you to come visit us to learn more. In the meantime, however, we welcome you to stay connected and come to visit Manatee or go to visitmanateelagoon.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you guys so much.
Rachel, thank you so much. As someone who's brand new to Florida, I'm so glad I got an opportunity to learn more about a Florida resident who's been here a lot longer than I have. So our first question for today is going to come from Bruce, who asks, on average, how many teeth does a manatee grow during their normal life?
That is a fantastic question that if anyone out there is a more knowledgeable manatee researcher than me, please reach out and let me know, because I have not found the answer to that question. It's a very popular one, and they will continue to produce teeth their whole life. I have not landed on a number for the average manatee. That would be great to know, though.
Our next question is from Ava, who asks, what are some policies that have been set in place to protect manatees?
Oh, that's a good one. Quite a few. So back in the 70s, the Endangered Species Act, I talked about how they're threatened, that they were placed underneath that act in order to get some protections, as well as the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So those are some more overarching acts and implementations to protect not just manatees, but a lot of other mammals and animals throughout the United States. And more specifically, because of the Endangered Species Act, you're not allowed to harass those manatees. You can't interact with them. They are curious and they may swim up to your paddleboard or your kayak, but you're not allowed to interact with them. There are also no wake zones and lowered speed limits along the intracoastal in Florida. So you may be able to go faster in some areas where manatees are not common, but around areas where we know there are lots of manatees, there are reduced speed limits during that manatee season. And so Manatee Lagoon, for example, from November 15th to March 31st, we have buoys that are put up around our property so that no motorized vessels are allowed near the manatees while they're in that safe spot. So there's quite a few. I could talk a lot more about the different ways that we have protected manatees, but those are some of the bigger ones out there.
Ariel is wondering, what makes a manatee happy? For example, do manatees have their own version of a dog wagging its tail?
Oh, that would be so sweet. I don't know of any outward visible ways to know that a manatee is happy. I would say when they have lots of food and warm water, they're pretty happy, but they do vocalize. So there are some scientists out there that study their vocalizations or the noises they make. And maybe one day someone will crack the code of manatee language and be able to know what their different squeaks mean and which ones mean they're happy.
Clara asks, how long do baby manatees live for?
Well, baby manatees are babies for about 3 to 5 years. They'll stay with mom. And during that time, they'll learn everything they can from mom. And then after about 3 to 5 years, I guess they're kind of considered adults at that point. And then they could live anywhere from 20 to 30 to over 60 years.
Philip is wondering, what is an individual act that I can do to support manatees?
Oh, I love that question. So what you can do from home to support manatees, if you live near the water, if you're a boater, then you can definitely be on the lookout when you're out on the water for these animals. Take it slow, keep a lookout for their noses popping up to take a breath. If you don't live near the water, or maybe you're not a fan of water sports, you can definitely reduce, reuse, recycle. I'm sure you've all heard that before. That will help manatees, that will help their environment and their habitat, and help everything else that lives there as well. So try and reduce how much waste you make and reuse whatever you can and recycle what you can't reuse.
Brittany is curious. I know manatees are right here in Florida, but where else in the world are they?
Yes, so our Florida manatee is found here in Florida, as well as some other southeastern and southwestern parts of the US along the Gulf. And then there's also another species of manatee or subspecies that's found in the Caribbean. And as well as the northern parts of South America. There's another species that is found in the Amazon. Another species is found in West Africa. And then the dugong is, remember, it's in that order. It's in the same grouping as manatees, but it's not quite a manatee. Those are found over in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific area, or the Pacific area.
Courtney asks, what are extinct creatures larger than the ones they are related to today?
So for the manatees, the extinct creature that was larger than the one I'm sorry, was that what or where? I think I may have misheard the question.
I'm sorry, why are extinct creatures
why?
larger than the ones they're related to today? I apologize.
No, that's all right. That's a good question as well. So as for the manatee and the Steller sea cow, the Steller sea cow is so much larger than the manatees we have today, mostly because it lived in a completely different habitat. So our manatees live in fairly warm water, so they don't have a lot of blubber to keep them warm, and they don't need as much insulation. But those Steller sea cow lived in areas where it was really cold, so they had very thick layers of blubber that added to their size, and and that's one of the reasons they were so much larger. Excuse me.
Kathy is wondering, where do the Florida manatees go when the water just gets too cold?
So there's lots of places that manatees will go in Florida when the water gets too cold. Some of them will swim further south. So if you've ever been to the southern parts of South Florida, maybe Miami, maybe the Florida Keys, it's not very common for the water temperature to drop for very long below 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It usually stays a little bit warmer. So in areas like that, they can hang out in the intercoastal or the shallow parts of the ocean. But in other areas of Florida, they will find warm water sites such as power plants like Manatee Lagoon, or the warm water site at Manatee Lagoon next to the power plant, as well as Florida springs. So if you've ever seen or heard or been to the springs in Florida, that water is coming from underground. So it's crystal clear, it's very clean, and it's going to be about the same temperature all year long. So it's usually around 70 degrees all year long, which is somewhere else the manatees can go to stay warm in the winter.
Rachel, we have time for just a few more questions. And our next one comes from Claire, who asks, do manatees care about mating? And if so, what do they look for in a mate?
Well, manatees definitely do care about mating. So they do want to make new manatees, right? They want to keep that population going. So I don't know exactly what they would look for in a mate. They don't have kind of any distinguishing characteristics like other animals do. Like, for example, lions, their big, thick mane, maybe something they look for in a mate, or in birds, the very colorful ones are the ones that animals or other birds would choose to mate with. Manatees don't really have any distinguishing characteristics like that they look for in a mate.
Jenny is wondering, do we know of any manatees that have had twins in the past?
Yes, we absolutely do. So just like in people, twins are possible. They're not very common. It's a little bit rare to see manatee twins, but it has happened, and it's very sweet when you get to see a mother calf with two twins.
And our final question today comes from Courtney, who asks, is poaching a problem for manatees at all?
Luckily here in Florida, it is not. So a long time ago, the native Floridians, as well as settlers that came to Florida, they would hunt, they would poach manatees for their meat and to use their bones for tools, but that has long since stopped, and it is not a problem. We don't currently have a problem, and we hope we never do have a problem with poaching manatees in Florida.
Well, Rachel, thank you again so much for being with us this afternoon and for teaching us so much about manatees. Do you have any final thoughts you would like to leave us with as we begin to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. And I would just like to motivate everyone, especially right now, to reduce the amount of waste that you're making. That's one of the biggest things you can do for animals and the environment and all of those animals' habitats. So try and recycle as much as you can, and reduce, reuse, and recycle.
Thank you so much again. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Stephanie for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Brian. I want to thank everybody for joining us on the call today to learn about these gentle giants. A special thanks to Rachel Shanker and Manatee Lagoon for taking time with us today to give us all this very insightful information and give us a call to action to help protect these gentle giants as well. You can learn more about our guests as well as our programs by visiting the websites you see on your screen here. Also, our Friday Q&As with the scientists take place weekly at 3 p.m. as part of a collaboration between Scientists in Every Florida School and the Community Scholars Initiative. You can find a recording of today's session, as well as all previous recorded sessions at the Thompson UF Earth Systems Institute YouTube channel. You can join us next Friday at 3 p.m. where we'll be talking about stingrays with our guests from Moat Marine Lab and Aquarium. With that, I'd like to say once again, thank you everyone and have a wonderful weekend. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.